Everybody, the American Space Museum. I'm Mark Marquette, and we're so glad you're with us to stay curious. February 3rd, 2023, and we've got 3 space shuttles that were launched on this date in space history. We've got the first object to land on an alien world, and we've got Apollo 14, 52 years ago, about to orbit the moon for the third lunar landing with America's first astronaut as a commander, Al Shepard. So today we're going to feature the beautiful photography of Mark and Tom Usiak, great partners of the American Space Museum who share their work with us regularly. This beautiful shot is of the night launch of, I believe, STS-63 at the 12:22 a.m. launch. And just a gorgeous image there of our wonderful shuttle launching off the pad. That was Eileen Collins making her first appearance in the pilot seat. And which orbiter was that? Discovery, the workhorse of our fleet with 39 launches throughout its history. And I was so pleased to see Discovery sitting there at the Udvar Hazy Museum two Julys ago, thanks to my friend and partner, Marty Winkle. Hello there, Marty. How are you doing today?
Doing good, Mark. How are you?
Well, good. 52 years ago, your work on Apollo 14 was headed to the moon as lunar module number, which one would that be? Number 8 was headed for a landing where Apollo 13 was going to land. Marty, doesn't seem 52 years ago, and you certainly don't look an Apollo era age. What do you think about looking back?
Well, I'm not sure if I don't know, Mark.
Okay.
I'm not sure how to answer your question.
Well, any nostalgic thinking about a half decade has slipped away, and you were in your youth working on our moon landers, the most unique spacecraft still built. All right. And we're going to talk in depth about the Apollo 14 landing on Monday's program. It happens on this Saturday, February 5th. And they're about to go into lunar orbit today, and we're going to tease you with some good stuff, including the training. Stay tuned. We've got some great training photos that our good friend Carlton Bailey got autographed by both moonwalkers. And you're going to be surprised at some of the details in these photos. So you're going to stick around for that, I know, and stay curious. Well, let's get on with the space history today. As you know, the American Space Museum for over 20 years has been preserving the birth of our space age in what we call its delivery room, Brevard County, Florida. Marty and I are sitting in our studios in our American Space Museum in downtown Titusville. We are 10 miles away from those rocket pads that launched humans to the moon, and we're poised again to do that hopefully in the next couple years. But on this date, February 3rd, 1966, was when the very first object safely landed on another world. Separating from its descent stage, a beach ball-sized spacecraft rolled onto the surface, bouncing a few times, and then its pedals opened up as a radio transmitter sent photos for the first time of another world. And of course, this was the Russian Luna 9 spacecraft in 1966. So while we declared a space race to the moon with Russia, they kind of frightened us. They're the first ones to land something soft landing on the moon. We didn't have all this detail in 1966. In fact, this artist rendering was only created in the 1980s on some of the newest information that was given. Behind you see the vehicle that brought it down close enough to the moon for this round object, beach ball size, to pop off. Some whip antennas came out, and it started taking pictures from on the top. There's a very crude camera that actually processed the film on board to transmit it there, kind of a Polaroid style. First view of an alien world, our moon, taken by a Russian spacecraft or something from Earth on there. So that was 1966. And of course, 1971, 5 years later, America is headed for the third successful landing on the moon. And here is the rocket launch of Apollo 14 headed off to the moon with astronaut Al Shepard, Edgar Mitchell, and Stu Rosa, who's going to orbit the moon while the other two explored the moon in great detail. And we'll tease you with some of that here at the end of Stay Curious today, but our program Monday will be devoted to the moon landing of Apollo 14. And we had a good friend in the museum, I understand, in Ed Mitchell. But let's look at the shuttles of February. We have 11 space shuttles launched in the month of February. These were some of the groundbreaking missions in the shuttle era. The first untethered spacewalk by Bruce McCandless, we're going to talk about on STS-41B, launched today, February 3rd, 1984. The first rendezvous at the Mir space station was going to happen. And that mission was launched on February 3rd, 1995, STS-63, with the first female pilot, Eileen Collins. The last ISS hardware installed was the cupola, and that was STS-130 in the month of February. And the second upgrade of the Hubble telescope was also done in the month of February. So we're going to enjoy looking at a good month of hard hat work at the space station, space science being done, very important mission with our Destiny lab put on the space station on this month. But let's look at the 3 shuttle launches that have many firsts in space history. And those would be among the records set, the first America fly-around of the Russian Mir space station, first female pilot, Eileen Collins, first African-American spacewalker, the first untethered spacewalkers, the first refurbished satellite to be returned to space happened in February, and the first 2 Russians to ride a shuttle happened in the month of February, and the first shuttle landed at Kennedy Space Center. And we'll be talking about those all month, so stay curious. STS-41B. There is the beautiful logo of it. It's quite a big, bold, long logo. At this time, on the left is the satellite being taken to space, paid for by the satellite company, paying NASA to ride to space. A refurbished satellite that was carried into space was also on the German pallet. Ron McNair handled the remote manipulator arm, deploying 2 satellites, and Bruce McCandless. There's the crew, including Bruce. Let's see, the crew was headed by Vance Brand. Vance Brand is at the lower left there, and Hoot Gibson. This was Hoot's first flight of 5 to space. And other astronauts were Ronald McNair, Robert Stewart, and yes, Gibson. Robert Gibson is the pilot there. Vance Brand's an Apollo astronaut. He's in his 90s. He was on the Apollo-Soyuz test project. McCandless performed the first untethered spacewalk. There is one of the Usiak brothers' shots at 10 seconds past the launch of the SRBs. This thing is way past the tower. Marty, 9 seconds, the Saturn V was still lumbering on the pad at this stage 52 years ago when it took off. So a 7-day, 23-hour mission, so we'll call it 8 days there. Again, another beautiful shot taken with Hasselblad cameras. This is 1984. So Tom and Mark Usiak of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and their team that included Steve Nolte were just refining their art and where to put the cameras. This was the beginning of one of the first shuttle launches by their team, and they ended up going out to the Cape over 70 times. So thank you, Tom and Mark, for sharing these beautiful images. And one day we'll be making these available on postcards and such here at our nonprofit American Space Museum. And of course, one of the classic photos of American space program, Bruce McCandless, so far away, completely untethered. lost in space if something went wrong, which was a lot of fear, Marty, as you well know as a space worker. Easily, one of those thrusters could have just stuck open and not been able to stop it and just start spinning him around to eternity. And we're so glad that didn't happen. They did have a few fail-safe things in there, but nothing that would prevent a real imminent disaster. And then no one remembers the second person to do anything. After Bruce McCandless donned this, the next day, Robert Stewart got out and did his untethered spacewalk. So, what a great mission with a great crew. 1984, still learning how to do things in space. Let me consult my shuttle scroll here, because I'm curious, Marty. Yeah, that was the 10th flight of the entire shuttle program, STS-41B, and we're so bold on the 4th flight of Challenger that we're going to send someone out on an untethered spacewalk. So, quite a beautiful mission, 41B. Here's the landing of it. Okay, the first to land at Kennedy Space Center, and I believe Mark Usiak was the landing shooter for this team. Launch pad 15, runway 15 there at Kennedy Space Center. Look at the mist coming off of the vehicle there as it roars to a stop. And what a sight that had to be to see Challenger landing for the first time where it took off in 1984. And they had quite a ceremony afterwards, touting the astronauts quickly up on stage there, you see, in the Rocket Garden of 1984, Marty. And look at the big dish antenna there and so forth to broadcast this event around the world. The landing there. Good stuff. Well, the next shuttle flight we want to feature is STS-60, which was flown by Discovery. Launched on February 3rd, 1994 at 7:10 a.m. It was a 8-day mission that was an agreement with the Russian Space Agency to fly in space two Russians, Sergei Krikalev, all right, or the first Russian to go to space on a shuttle was Sergei Krikalev. He is now the chief of the Roscosmos. Basically, their administrator over there. He's very American friendly, and because of him, a Russian will be flying February 26th on an American spacecraft as they rotate out the crew. Expedition 69 going up on February 26th, Marty. I don't forget the time. Did you look at to see what time you're going to be selling T-shirts?
Well, the launch is, I think, 7:07. If it's 7:0 something, but I'm pretty sure it's
in the morning?
7:07 a.m. Yeah.
Oh, that'd be a gorgeous liftoff in the dawn then. All right, just around the corner. The first shuttle flight of 1994, again, marked the first flight of a Russian cosmonaut on a U.S. space shuttle. They deployed a space hab where it was in the back there where they grew crystals. They had some canisters on there and a big radio calibration dish, all kinds of other things in their payload, including the wake shield facility. That's what that is on the shuttle arm, is the WSF wake shield facility, a deployable retrievable experiment designed to leave a vacuum wake in low Earth orbit that's 10,000 times greater achieved in Earth. In this ultra vacuum, defective-free thin film layers of gallium arsenide and other semiconductor materials are grown. So, heady science being done in 1994 on STS-60. And here's the crew in space. Little pixelated there, but that's Charlie Bolden, his first command. Kenneth Reitler, Jan Davis, Ron Sega, Franklin Chang Diaz on his second flight, and then Sergei his head's right above Bolden there. And of course, Bolden went on to be a NASA administrator. Jan Davis had 3 or 4 flights. We'd love to meet her. And here is the crew of STS-60 on the walkout. that Tom Usiak photographed. Always a famous photo op where Tom is in a press corps there of maybe 20 photographers and videographers and some radio people and newspaper people probably there as their T-38s land, and they do a little talk about, hey, we're here 10 days before our launch and we can't wait to go. Let's light that candle. And here is that candle lit. And a beautiful shot there by Mark and Tom. And then STS-60, because it was launched at 7:10 a.m., it was still in the morning twilight. And a beautiful shot that you get there. Not easy to balance the light of that hot flame and still get the orbiter looking good there. Good job, guys. And the third flight launched on February 3rd was STS-63. And this launched at 12:22 a.m. on February 3rd, 1995, a year to the day after Discovery was launched for its 18th flight. Then it flew a 19th flight in 1994, and this in 1995 was its 20th flight of Discovery. The crew of 6 was commanded by James Weatherby, and we've got that crew here. There's the beautiful launch that Tom took. Hasselblad camera, square format there, and a nightmare for film photographers as there's not much latitude like there is in today's digital, meaning the exposure's got to be right on, and you're guessing what that exposure is at night with the flames actually illuminating the orbiter. You can't see much of the fuel tank. And but there is the crew in space. We had on this trip James Weatherby, Eileen Collins. Weatherby is a very interesting astronaut, 6 times a commander, or 5 times a commander of his 6 flights, and he's the drummer for the rock band, astronaut rock band Max Q. Love to meet Weatherby. I've met Eileen Collins many times. What a wonderful lady. This is in 1995. 30 years later, Marty, almost, you'd think she was just selling Avon or something. She's such a nice, congenial lady. You've got Janice Voss on this trip, who lost her life to cancer, unfortunately, after 4 flights. Bernard Harris, African-American who did an EVA. Vladimir Titov, the second Russian to be part of the American program. And there's David Foale next to Bernard Harris there in the front. David Foale would live on the Mir space station. So here he is going up to rendezvous with it, and then I think a year later he is dropped off there for a 4 or 5 month stay. So the first fly around of the Russian space station Mir. Now, why would you waste time going up there and flying around it, instead of docking with it? Because it's that complicated of a thing. There's Eileen, picture that Tom took at their T-38. And I'm blanking.
And you, Harris?
The author that wrote the book, Eileen's book, too. Jonathan Ward. There we go, Jonathan Ward. I do have these momentary senior things, and I'm talking to a senior to recapture my memory. So bear with. Yeah, Jonathan Ward. Apologize, Jonathan. Wrote a fabulous book with Eileen, Breaking the Glass Ceiling, and recounts her experiences. That wasn't so easy, okay? And we'll talk more about Eileen as we go along this month here. But here is a 63. This is Carlton actually took this photograph. Carlton Bailey, our photography friend of Discovery at the in the VAB. Yep, that'd be in the VAB, Marty, right? Before they hauled it out of there.
Yeah.
Beautiful, surreal shot there. Look at all that detail. And then out on the pad for the launch. And again, that is sort of the spot, I can tell, where Tom photographed the night launch of 63. That's the day. Yeah, that's the daytime situation there. And they know where this is. That's B. Let's see. Is that 39A or B? That's we're talking 63. Consult the shuttle scroll here. 63 took off of B, Marty. And like Marty said the other day, not many were taken off of B. They did a bunch in a row there in 1995. And we'll break down those two one day just to see the number on there. So, yes, our shuttles of February, 11 of them. And there's 3 of them launched on the same day, February 3rd. Discovery twice and Challenger once. And we really are, we love our shuttle history. We constantly talk about our shuttle astronauts because they're in our communities doing great things today to inspire the next generation, promoting the Artemis going back to the moon and the International Space Station's 22-year legacy still living strong, Marty. Well, we hope you've all enjoyed the Shuttles of the Month. To end today in this week's Stay Curious program, we're going to put you under the press there, okay? The Wizard of Id cartoonist became a symbol of some of the Apollo missions. Gary Hart endorsed that. He was the artist. This was a decal given out to the working press. Okay, ha ha, on Apollo Roman numeral 14 there. So just one of the little archival memoranda things that we have laying around our museum. When you look at that big, beautiful moon this weekend, and I know you will, and remember, that kind of moonshine you can't get too much of. That red circle, Marty, is right where your lunar module tail number 8 landed at Fra Mero. All right kind of left of center of the moon. You see the center of the moon, and you just go to the little dark area there. It's actually in the chin of the woman in the moon. We've talked about that before. Tycho Brahe, Tycho, the crater at the bottom, is the bright red crater. It's like a pendant that the profile of the woman's wearing. She's looking like this. Anyway, that's where they landed. And a few facts about this crew. To tease you a little bit, there's Stu Rose on the left, red-haired guy, Al Shepard, and Ed Mitchell. The only one who'd been to space, of course, Al Shepard. He experienced 15 minutes of the launch and 5 minutes of weightlessness before landing over at the Grand Cayman Islands over there by the Bahamas. So basically a rookie crew, all right? And they carried out the longest list of experiments on the lunar surface to the time, demonstrated the reasonably long distances can be covered on foot, and brought back 95 pounds of moon rock. In this spacecraft right here, a photo I've taken a few years ago of Apollo 14 command module named Kitty Hawk. And Stu Rosa was aboard Kitty Hawk while the lunar module Antares was landed on the moon. They put a rope around this, Marty. It's a different configuration out there, but it's a beautiful display of now a 52-year-old spaceship. There is Edgar Mitchell, about 15 years ago, 12 years ago, talking to one of our founders, Charlie Mars, who Edgar knew real well because Charlie was involved as a NASA manager dealing with the Grumman lunar module and putting it on the Saturn V rocket and all the astronauts that were going to go in it. So Charlie Mars, I lovingly call him our godfather of our museum, is doing well in his 80s, and we lost Edgar Mitchell about 6 or 7 years ago before I came to the Space Museum. But he was really a good friend of the museum and liked to hang out. Not a very extrovert man. He was kept to himself quite a lot. I've been told by people that were around him. Kind of spoke when spoken to type of gentleman. He was also very involved in the paranormal. His Noetic Institute is an active institute that investigates UFOs, paranormal activity, and he was a believer, Edgar Mitchell, and even did ESP experiments on the moon. Well, there's lunar module number 8 in the production line of Grumman on Fra Mero. This was the most pinpoint landing. Imagine that, what pride Alan Shepard must have had, for he landed Antares only 175 feet from its targeted landing site. Wow. That's half a football field off. He was instead of landing in the center of a football field, he landed at one of the end zones, let's say, okay? But this was a mission fraught with a lot of trouble at the very beginning, trying to get Antares out of the slaw, the container that was on top of the third stage of as that SRB-4 or S-14B headed to the moon and the translunar injection. Took 6 docking attempts. And we'll talk about that a little bit Monday, but they think there's a piece of ice in the mechanism that somehow got in there, froze up, and kept a latch from flipping down until they just did it enough that chunk of ice broke up. Very interesting. Then on the lunar landing itself, the 10-minute computerized program going down to the moon, they realized had a glitch in it that might abort the mission, all right, as it was headed down to the moon. So while they were still heading down to the moon, Edgar Mitchell was pumping numbers into the pad of what they call the DSKY, DSKY computer, 64K, and it was a big pad of numbers like an adding machine. And he was putting in 1, 3, 5, a noun, 2, 7, 6, verb. Do you got that, Houston? Yes. As they're going down on the moon, Marty, I watched this on YouTube last night, some of the footage of the Apollo 14 landing. I encourage you to do that. Very beautiful landing out the window, pilot's window. It's like really more like of a helicopter than any of them I've ever seen of the 6, where Shepard just smooth sees his target and just going for it, and they're so calm. Meanwhile, if if Mitchell doesn't get this fix in, the mission could be aborted at any moment, and he's so calm and cool and collected. Then the lunar landing radar isn't kicking in, and it has to at 10,000 feet. They pulled the fuse out, put it back in. At about 12,000 feet, it kicked in, and you can hear Edgar Mitchell go, "Whoo, that was a close one." Such cool and calm demeanor, Marty, these gentlemen, these skilled guys had. This is why we needed test pilots on these missions, was you just can't believe that they're just not even getting excited that, oh, we got to do this loop around this computer and we're already heading down to the moon. It's getting closer and closer. And now we need that landing radar to kick in, or we're popping off this thing even before we land, like the dress rehearsal of Apollo 10 did. A couple other things about it here, that they landed on a tilt because they knew they were leaning to one end. And when they got outside on the first of 2 4-hour lunar walks, they couldn't believe how it had sunk into a lunar crater. There is one of the pads there, sunk in. The 5-foot lunar probe is busted there. And there's the one that really dug into a low lunar crater. And look at it to the left, Marty. If it had gotten into that crater in there, holy cow. We've talked about before, there was a certain angle that was the danger, like 15 degrees, I believe I've read, that supposedly the liftoff wouldn't go very well. I don't care if it's 25 degrees. They were going to lift off the moon no matter what angle it was, and just do a workaround real quick. So a few pictures to tease you. History books say that it was slightly, of course, it was a surprise of the undulating ground at Frau Maro was hard to walk in. They took the first lunar wheeled cart with them, all right. But everyone wants to remember the golf balls that Shepard hit on the moon, and we'll talk about that here in a second. We'll talk about that right now. Alan Shepard, an avid golfer, hit 2 golf balls, 2 Spalding balls with a McGregor 6-iron attached to a tool shaft, his own 6-iron that he used. Here is a gorgeous photo of that. Yeah, right. Pencil sketch by Doug Forrest. Hi, Doug. Thanks for watching today. Thank you for letting us share your work. This man is obsessed with the Apollo era. That's all he draws. I know that he probably spent hard to say, maybe 40 solid hours, maybe 400 hours on this. Very meticulous, every area of this. And what an angle that Doug Forrest has captured. And you can see his work at apolloart.com or just Doug Forrest, Forrest. And we thank you for watching today, Doug. But yes, you can see that video over and over. Edgar Mitchell wants to say, hey, I did some athletics on the moon too. He took one of the poles and threw it like a javelin. All right, a javelin throw is what he says he was. Mark Usiak knows that. Thank you for sharing your pictures, Mark. Dave Stangy's watching today. Cynthia Rossi. Hi, Cynthia. We got Pamela Shivik. Hey, Pam. Daniel DeYoung. Hey, Daniel. Good to see you on board today. As well as Carlton Bailey, Steve Hammer, Tom Celentano, Bill Whiting, Dano DeMano, Christopher Mick, and Hazel Banks. Hi, Hazel. She was a secretary to these astronauts. And the stories that she can tell me about them are always fascinating. And thank you for all you do at our Space Museum, Hazel. Well, we're going to remember the Apollo 14, of course, for the 2 golf balls. What were they again, Marty? Spalding. Yep. And a McGregor 6-iron. Okay. Well, a lot of people thought they'd be Titleist. All right. But they used the Spalding balls. They brought back 94 pounds of rocks and samples. Most samples from this lunar highlands were 4 to 4.3 billion years old, much older than the lava basalts where Apollo 11 and 12 landed. Those were only 3 to 3.5 billion years old. So these rocks were almost 1 billion years older, very important. And the whole area looked from orbit very flat and with some undulations. But what they didn't know about the undulations were the lunar regolith or powder is like fine like talcum powder. And yet it settles like a dry snow there, Dave Stangy. You know all about that, you and Larry Pusker, the dry snow that you can't pack a snowball, and it's very loose. Therefore, they were up to their knees in points of time, trudging through that, and they got very tired doing it. They had a hard time pulling that rickshaw through. And speaking of the rickshaw, check this out as we end another episode of Stay Curious. This is Carlton Bailey. Thank you for offering these photographs that he had autographed, okay, in 1970s. I don't know when he had them autographed, quite frankly, but he did have them autographed in front of Alan Shepard and Edgar Mitchell. And look at that real close, Marty. You see anything weird about that picture?
Yeah. Armadillo.
There's an armadillo burrowing in there. And yes, an armadillo in the foreground there below Edgar Mitchell's picture. He must have got a kick out of signing that. Of course, how do we know who's Edgar Mitchell in the picture, and how do we know who's Alan Shepard, Marty?
Well, Alan Shepard has a red stripe on his spacesuit.
Yep, and in black and white, it looks black around his arms and his legs, and they put one on his helmet too there, so you could distinguish who's who in the movies. And but one other note there, what do they have in their lunar bucket?
Looks like a football.
They have a football in there for sure. They definitely have a football. The caption goes, Alan Shepard, center, removes rock from a scoop held by lunar module pilot Edgar Mitchell during lunar exercise activities at Kennedy Space Center. An armadillo that came up upon the scene during the training session burrows into the simulated lunar surface in the foreground. They called it a rickshaw. It was a modularized equipment carrier. An MEC was the proper acronym NASA used. Modularized equipment carrier, or rickshaw. And so this was taken, what's the date on this? December 8th. And this photo was taken, and they were launched January 31st. So this is about 6 weeks before the big day, and they're there practicing. And comment, Marty?
Yeah, Tom McKeever commented. He said it was always speculated whether Shepard would have landed without a working landing radar. In an interview in 1989 about this, Shepard replied, "You'll never know."
That's cool. Who offered that?
Tom McKeever.
Tom McKeever. Thank you, Tom. I
Yes.
do remember reading something about that, and Marty knows well where the LAD lunar radar was called the what?
Landing radar.
Yeah. Uh, it was right on the bottom of the vehicle as you're facing the stairs going down. It'd be in the back right. And that is some speculation. And boy, I watched that YouTube, and it was tense there as you hear the conversation, but they were very calm about it. And then Houston says, "Well, pull the circuit breaker out and back in." They did it, and Shepard says, "Done." And then about 3 seconds later, it kicked in. Now, they had been about 10,000 feet, and they were supposed to abort. And if they didn't abort, Marty, I think they would have had to manually override that. That was in the uh, P-69 program that they were using, I think, on that. But a guy who trained them, Bob Pearson's passed away, or we'd asked Bob that. But thank you for bringing that tidbit up, because I think he probably would have too. All right. And made up something about like, well, we didn't have the data or whatever. He landed on a lot of aircraft carriers, Marty. And so he wasn't scared to land on a big old fat planet where he had a lot of room. And the lunar module was flying flawlessly. They all talked about how they were just so amazed at how easy and maneuvering it was. And Marty, this was the first lunar module that they put slosh bellows in the tank. 11 and 10, 11, and 12 all had some weight distribution, could feel that fuel slosh around in there. And this is the first one where they put in baffles, and it worked beautifully. And Marty's nodding, "Yep, I read that, and I know my stuff there." Thank you, Marty. There is Shepard, because he's got the stripes on there at that rickshaw. Another beautiful autograph that Carlton Bailey got that. I'll give you $25 for that, Carlton. I'll tell you what, I'll throw in a meal at the local rib joint, okay? So, but thank you seriously, Carlton, for sharing this. We love sharing your show and tell things on the American Space Museum Stay Curious program. And like we have the Uziacs, their show and tell ended up in a lot of magazines, books, and now on Stay Curious. So, Marty, thank you very much, sir, for a great week. We wrap up today episode 745 of Stay Curious, born out of the pandemic. March 23rd, 2020 was our first show, and we are so blessed that you've been following us along the way. And I'm blessed to have great leadership here in Karen Conklin, our executive director, who pretty much has said, "Run with it, Mark." And we have, and with my good partner Marty here, we hope that we're providing some good content, photos, and space history that you won't get anywhere else. So, thank you, Marty. Anything else to button up on our Streamlabs broadcast?
Two things. First, Carlton, I'll double what Mark offered you. And Dano
I offered Carlton. He's saying he'll double.
I'll double.
Oh, okay.
And Dano Tamano said it's a lunadillo.
A lunadillo. Okay, I like that there. And the lunadillo, that's a good way to end it there. Look at that lunadillo there. Okay. On the lunar imitation radius there. Good enough there. We love you all for chiming in and getting into what we're doing here. We're having a lot of fun. We got a lot of guests lined up for next week and the whole entire month. I'm going to be posting those guests on our Facebook page here. And just to tease you a little bit, so you come back Monday, we're going to talk about Apollo 14. And we're going to talk about one of the greatest gotchas of the Apollo astronaut gotcha era, where they're always pulling pranks on each other. So until next week, I'm Mark Marquette saying we'll see you again to bridge the space between us.